back to my channel. I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we're going to be doing another really fun piece. Today we're going to be doing a dragon piece. I've taken the longest time to get another dragon piece out and I really wanted to do one for you guys. So today we're going to be doing a Jade inspired Chinese dragon. Anyways, let's get started. Okay, before we start on the sewing for our dragons, I wanted to show off the fabric I have for it. Of course, I've got this nice furry green fabric, but I found this scaly green fabric that I really like. Usually when you find fabric like this, it's stretchy, but this is nice and firm, so you can sew with it really easily. And it's got a nice sheen to it. Anyways, let's show you guys the pattern. So this is the pattern that I'm going to be using to make the dragon. The neck, belly, and tail are going to be the shiny scale fabric, and then the legs and the belly are going to be the fur fabric. We're going to later add a strip of fur going down the back of the dragon, but that won't be cut out until later. It's really simple anyways. So this is what our fabric looks like all cut out for the sides, and I'm just going to sew all of these together. This is what they look like all sewn together, and we're going to now take the pieces for the legs and sew the front halves of them together. After that, you're going to take the piece of fabric for the belly and we're going to attach all the pieces together. Okay, so here's the finished product for the bulk of our sewing. You can see all the different legs and everything all put together. Now for the front legs of the dragon, you'll want to make sure to leave enough space so when we're adding the wireframe and all the clay pieces, you can fit the front legs through the fabric. So I left a pretty good gap to work with. Don't be afraid to leave too much sometimes because you can always sew it later after you add it to the wireframe. Now for the wireframe, I used 16 gauge galvanized steel wire that I got at my local hardware store. You could probably order it online too, but I don't think you can get this at a craft store. Now what I did is I used the fabric pattern that we used to make all of our sewing, and I took measurements of it so I knew how long to make my wires. I have a piece for the spine and then 2 pieces to make all the legs, and I'm just going to take a thinner wire and wrap all of these together into one giant frame. Okay, now that our sewing and our wireframe are finished, I'm going to move on to making the clay pieces. So I just have a basic glass container that I'm going to use as a surface to work on. I made a lump of tinfoil in a rough size that I want the head to be, and I'm going to cover that all in clay. The clay I'm using is original Sculpting. It's really simple to work with and you bake it in your own kitchen oven. Once we have our foil nice and covered in clay, we can work on adding the eyes. Simple way to add eyes to a piece is just use 2 balls of clay for the actual eyes, push them into the place where you want them. Make sure to look at different angles of the piece to make sure that they're even, because sometimes they'll look even one direction, but if you like turn it and look at the very top of the piece, one will be like sticking out more. So just kind of make sure you got them placed right, and then use strips of clay to make the eyelids. To make the mouth of the dragon, I'm just going to take a long strip of clay and I'm going to lay it onto the face of the dragon. Once I have it in the shape that I want it, I'm going to blend it into the upper part of the face because this is going to be its upper lip. The bottom lip is kind of going to mainly be hidden under this, so you really don't need to make it unless you want to create like a gapping effect with the mouth. Now for his chin, I wanted to give him a little bit of fur, so I just put a lump of clay onto that spot, and then I used one of my scratching tools to just kind of create a bunch of line works to try and make it look like fur. I used the same technique to add a little bit of fur to the top of his head and to make his mustache. To make the scales on his lips, I made it really simple. I just used one of my tools that has a rounded edge and I just pushed into it to make it look like he had scales. And then I divided the scales using another tool to just make line work. Now to do the feet for the dragon, I made a very simple little wireframe to start with, and what we're going to do is we're going to make the claws first and then bake those. That way when we're working with the rest of the foot we don't bump them or anything, because they're kind of at the edge of the wireframe and they're really easy to bump. So I'm just going to put a little piece of clay on the end of each wire, and we're going to shape it until we like the shape of it, and we're going to bake it probably for just 15 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit. Once the claws have finished baking, we can move on to making the padding for the bottom of the feet. To do this, we're just going to use strips of clay to cover the surface of the bottom of the foot. We're going to blend all that together and then use some tools to create some creases and stuff to make it look like he has toe pads. Once you like the basic shape of the bottom of the feet, we're going to bake this again for probably another 20 minutes at 275 Fahrenheit, and then we can work on making the very tops of the feet. Now doing the tops of the feet is very similar to how we did the bottoms. We're just going to use strips of clay to cover the surface, blend it in. After you have it to where you like it, you can start adding some scales. To do this, I'm just using pieces of clay to make the larger ones, and then I'm using my other tools to make indentions to make it look like there's smaller scales on the toes. After you have all your clay finished, you're going to take the head and all the legs, and we're going to put them in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for about 55 minutes. Okay, now we can finally move on to the painting for the clay pieces. Now since our dragon is a nice pretty green color, we're going to prime all of our clay pieces with green paint. You might have to do a few layers of this because green is just not one of those colors that likes to go onto surfaces. Once our green paint has dried, we're going to add some detail to it. First thing I'm going to do is add some highlights. The best way to make a nice green highlight is actually to put yellow over green. So I'm going to put yellow paint where I want the highlights to be, and then I'm going to blend them in with a bigger brush. Now for the furry spots on his face, I decided that I wanted them to kind of look a little fiery, so we're going to start by painting them red, and then we'll probably add orange and yellow highlights to these after the red is dried. For the eyes, I'm just going to paint them solid black. Once that's dried, I'm going to do a little bit of blue in the corners to make it look like the pupil is nice and wide, and then just add some white highlights. Now once all the acrylic paints are dried, we're going to move on to adding some gold modeling paint. This paint takes a lot longer to dry, so it's always the last thing I like adding. So I'm just going to go over the scales on his face with this, and then we're going to move on to painting the feet. Now for painting the feet, it was the same technique that we used for the face. We painted a nice green primer on them, and then we added some yellow highlights to the tops of the feet. After that, I took like a nice light brown, almost khaki color, and I painted on some little paddings to the bottom of the feet. I took a lighter version of this paint and we painted the little bit of skin that goes around the nail just to emphasize it. And then for the claws themselves, I painted them a nice black. And then I used the modeling paint that we painted the scales on the face with to paint the big scales at the very top of the feet. Now for my clay pieces, I like to apply a thin layer of resin over everything to help protect the paint. If you're interested in doing this, I went into more depth in it with the one sculpture I did, the Nightmare Before Christmas sculpture that I did for Halloween. So if you want to see more of how to do the resining, just go to that video, it's really simple. But if you don't want to use resin, you can get a spray-on varnish or some kind of sealant to help protect the paint. Okay, all of our clay pieces are nice and dry and finished, and we're going to add them to the wireframe. We're going to start by adding the feet. We're just going to take the wire that's sticking out of the feet and wrap another wire around it to connect it to the frame. We're going to put the fabric over our wireframe, and we're going to take our hot glue gun and glue the fabric around the base of the feet. After all the feet are nice and glued into place, you'll want to sew the back ends of the feet closed and you'll stuff them. Okay, so now we can start on a bunch more sewing. We're going to finish the bottom of the tail. To do this, I have a strip of fur fabric and we're going to connect the two sides together. So this is what it'll look like right now. It's got a nice strip at the very bottom, so that's furry, and then the sides are scaly. Next, we're going to add the head to the dragon. To do this, we're going to pull out all that tinfoil that's inside of it, and then we're going to put a nice amount of hot glue in there and push that wire inside of the head. We're going to hold that in place until it cools. After that, we're going to glue the fabric for the neck around the head. Okay, the last thing we need to do to finish the sewing for the dragon is we're going to take this really long strip of fur fabric and we're going to sew it down the back of the dragon, connecting everything together and stuffing it. So I'm going to do the neck, stuff that, do the body, stuff that, and then finish off by stuffing the tail and doing all of that. Okay, so all the sewing is finished and we're going to just add a few more details and we'll be done. So I'm going to make some felt ears for a dragon. I just cut out a basic shape with the green felt, and I'm going to glue this onto a nice skin color felt. The skin color is going to be the inside of the ears, and the green is going to be the outside. Once those are all done, we're just going to glue them onto the face, and then add a little bit of fur to kind of cover up the seams. The only thing I did after this was I took a hair trimmer and I went over the fur for the front of the legs. So I basically made that fur really nice and short so you can see the shape of the legs better. I didn't really touch any other fur. Okay guys, and that's how I made a Chinese dragon plush. I really hope you enjoyed it. If so, leave me a like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff. Make sure to leave comments down below if you have ideas or questions, anything at all. He'll be up for sale on my Etsy shop, so check the links down below. I'm also going to be making a second one. I tried to make that before the end of the video, but didn't work out. But as soon as he's done, I'll have 2 of these in my shop. Follow me on Twitter if you guys are interested in seeing works in progress more often. I don't have a whole lot of you guys on Twitter, but I would really like to be more interactive on that. And I think that's the last thing. Thank you guys for watching. You have a wonderful day. Bye!